On behalf of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium, thank you all for attending this panel on new IT innovation models. I would like to introduce your moderator, Roger Roberts from McKinsey. Thank you.
Thanks, Bal. I'm Roger Roberts from McKinsey. I've been with McKinsey 18 years and lead our IT strategy service line in North America, based in Palo Alto, California, but from roots here at the Institute, Sloan, in 1992. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to bring together this panel today. This is an incredibly important topic that we hear in our client work with CIOs regularly, which is how does the CIO take on the challenge of enabling innovation in the business? You've got so many other challenges of reliability, resilience, productivity and operating cost management, and at the same time, the need to think about how you also break the mold and use information in new ways to create value. And so we will try to explore that here in this panel today. We're going to start with the discussion with our panelists, but we'd love to involve the audience in the last part of the discussion, so be thinking ahead about questions. We're going to reserve about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for those. So to introduce our panelists, on my left is Professor Michael Cusumano. Professor Cusumano has the distinction of being my strategy professor in 1991, but most importantly now the Sloan Management Review Distinguished Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School. He specializes in strategy, product development, and entrepreneurship in the computer software industry, and is one of the world's leading experts on platforms. Further left is Arthur Filip, who is Vice President and General Manager of Technology Consulting at HP, and has responsibilities that span a core portfolio that includes converged infrastructure, network consulting, education services, advanced solutions, and some interesting vertical areas like digital hospital and energy efficiency management, as well as the cloud. Further over is Roy Rosin, who's VP of Product Management and Innovation at Intuit, a leading software company that's best known for Quicken, QuickBooks, and TurboTax. And Roy advises new teams across the country or across the company and manages their Brainstorm business, which is Intuit's innovation management platform. And at the far end is Alan Trefler. Alan is the founder and CEO of Pegasystems. He also serves as the chairman of the board of directors and oversees the global sales function, and is a very compelling speaker who's a regular here at the MIT CIO Forum. And we'd like to give the panelists just a short opportunity to speak. Maybe we'll start with Alan and come back to my left side here, in terms of what the role is that you play in innovation in your businesses. Just a brief discussion of what that role is, and then we'll get into the meat of our conversation.
Starting with me?
Yep.
So our business is all about allowing our clients to innovate. We're the leader in a space that's badly named business process management. But what it's really about is enabling organizations to have a whole different way of looking at their technology assets. Being able to come at your technology from a customer-centric perspective, being intrinsically multi-channel, really focusing on what you do, to be immediate, to get rid of the silos of your organization, and to make sure that your organization can build for change, which actually is our tagline. We think that being able to iterate, being able to build your technology in a model-driven automation environment is what it takes to let organizations innovate. And when you can then move that ability to design that to the business people themselves, you have a pace of innovation that enables some of the world's most sophisticated companies to both serve their clients better and get tremendous operational efficiencies.
So I represent two aspects of innovation, actually. I was Intuit's first innovation leader across our divisions, where really my role was to create an environment where people could do great innovation, an entrepreneurial environment where small teams could get a lot of new things to market very quickly and learn fast, validate their assumptions quickly. So in that role, there's a number of things that I was able to do with a lot of help across the organization, which did focus on removing obstacles, changing the way we measured success early on, even how we structured teams, all the way through some capacity and skill building to make sure that our people were connected to the world and were able to see things that other people missed. So that internal side, there was technology platform changes. We did, actually, as part of that role, build Brainstorm, which is our idea management platform, where we saw that one piece of what was critical was connecting ideas to the right people who could improve and shape them or act on them and make them move forward and go somewhere. And so we built the platform around making those connections. We've since started to license that platform to other enterprises, government organizations, nonprofits. And so it's now a lot of my role in leading the Brainstorm program has been working with other enterprises to create a culture of innovation at their place and to allow them to build new businesses, as well as to get beyond the definition of building new businesses as innovation, which I know we'll get into, so I won't go deeply there now.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arthur Filip from Hewlett-Packard. And I too have two roles, if you will. One is to lead innovation and to catalyze innovation within our own consulting organization. And second is to continuously challenge our people every day and the clients that we serve around the world to innovate as well. And this is a subject near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. Innovation, when you're in the consulting business and you're in the business of providing strategy, guidance, you build systems, not just technology, but people and process. When you're in that business, being able to innovate means having tremendous people interlock, if you will. And I will argue today that people are the most important part of innovation, not just the technology or the dollars or the process, but it's intellectual capital, it's intellectual property, it's knowledge management. It's having the ability to connect people using technology or other forms so that they can rapidly innovate and build a culture that has sustainable innovation. Number one, not stifling innovation by having process, but having the right process in place so that you can take ideas through the vetting process, through commercialization, all the way through to profit. So having good people systems in place is something that we're very focused on, and I'd like to share some points of view with you on today.
Okay, thanks, Arthur. I'm Michael Cusumano, as Roger mentioned. I'm a professor in the Sloan School, also engineering systems. I've been in MIT for 25 years. My role in innovation, I suppose, is largely in teaching students and working with companies as an advisor, member of the board, and a consultant. So I've been teaching a class called The Business of Software and Digital Platforms, which I started in 1997. And we've looked through all sorts of transformations and disruptions in platforms, from PC client server to the internet to cloud computing and all those sorts of things. So my students get a pretty wide view of the software business, again, broadly defined, going into everything from enterprise systems to consumer systems to different kinds of applications. On a number of boards I've served, I guess I've been the point person for trying to look at technology trends and help develop new product areas or practice areas. So I've been active in that role, trying to help some of the companies I've worked with think about trends and manage innovation that way. And I've written a number of books on the subject: Platform Leadership, 2002. My most recent book, Staying Power, is really about the trends of how platforms and services are coming together as two sort of mega trends driving a lot of attention in business models as well as innovation. And if I get a chance about it, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Thanks.
Well, thanks, everybody. So I wanted just to do a little bit of level setting there, but I noticed that everyone used the word innovation numerous times, but often it's not quite clear, you know, what is an innovation? How do you know it when you see it? So I'd like to toss that question to Alan and just say, in your context, how do you know innovation when you see it, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I think that innovation is the marriage of invention and pragmatism propelled by the ability to iterate, the ability to continuously improve. And in the IT context, in the business context in which we live, you see innovation when the business people find that the cycle time through which they can come up with an idea, get that idea implemented, deploy it at massive scale, and then continually refine it, reusing where it makes sense, specializing around the customer where that makes sense. That's when you see some of the most innovative companies I've ever seen. Companies like Medco, for example, a $75 billion firm we work with that is completely transforming the whole way business and IT work together and transforming the way that the traditional sort of specify, design, code, deploy, pray IT model has traditionally worked. And I'll tell you, if you'd like, when you don't see innovation in IT, you don't see innovation in IT about 98% of the time, because as an industry, the guys in computer software, guys like me, have completely failed IT as an industry, because I would tell you that in the last 60 years, there has been zero innovation about how we actually instruct the computers at the last mile where the work really happens. When we end up recoding our business ideas into Java and .NET or JavaScript, we're not doing anything to provide business-driven innovation that is superior, frankly, it's arguably inferior, to the metaphors we used when we used COBOL, PL1, and in the languages from the 60s. So I think you don't have innovation when the mechanics, when the pragmatism and that ability to change isn't an intrinsic part of your strategy. You need the idea, and you need a conceptual platform that will evolve and let you build for change.
And when we started, we defined innovation as new products and services when we started. It took us a while to realize how wrong that was. Most value creation is happening in business model innovation, in commercial innovation like P&G is so great at. And it took a while to say, look, innovation really is the creation and capture of value from new ideas. And so, from our perspective, the focus on new products and services was good. We did increase annual new product releases by about 6x over about a 4-year period. And so there was goodness there, but as you start to look at value creation, it is coming from things like business model innovation. And so essentially, when I see innovation now, it is how quickly can people act on their insights? How quickly can they test their new ideas and validate those new ideas? How quickly can they get those new ideas in front of people to have that validation? So you certainly see it manifest in growth, but you see it manifest in engaged employees who can do great things quickly.
Well, that's interesting, right? What do you see that kind of leads to great outcomes, right? Do you see that you need to have some sort of catalyst that's needed, right? Some particular insight, or a distinctive person who brings an orthogonal perspective, right? Or some kind of disruptive technology, or can you actually create these conditions in the right context?
You want me to start, Roger?
Yeah, sure.
So the gift that I got from Intuit when I started was time to sit back and really study deeply. We had been a serial disruptor. We had disrupted 3 different industries ourselves, and it got big and slow, like some other companies often do. And so I got the gift of going off and saying, who has consistently reproduced great outcomes? And whether you're looking at the venture capital industry, whether you're looking at wonderful companies like P&G since 2001 under Lafley, or Google, who's our next door neighbor and our shared board members with, you see a pattern. There really is a fundamental framework that we operate under now. And it's the 4 parts of it are creating an environment where people can be free to innovate. The environment definitely has to do with, it has to be important. So there has to be something, often changing what you measure, what you make visible. What are the metrics you make visible and celebrate? Are you really excited about revenue from things less than 3 years old? Are you excited about time to market? So there's those types of things that make it important to people. There is the platform, why we did brainstorm, just allowing those connections to happen faster, allow people with one piece of the puzzle to connect to others much more quickly, and ideas develop much more quickly. There is skills. We certainly have done skills and training. And so the time, I mean, this is the toughest message. People, if you want them to fundamentally reimagine and act on their insights, whether it's work they're doing internally or work with customers externally, they need time to play out and try things and try new things. And so there's ways that we can talk about that later in the session. And the other, so that's the first section, the environment. It also goes, though, across the people, how you structure small teams, and who you choose on those teams. It goes into prioritization, how you're selecting ideas. And the last one I'll hit is approach. And approach can be summarized very simply as learn fast at low cost. It is a world of rapid validation now. It's not making a couple big bets and putting a lot of wood behind those arrows. It's more making a lot of little bets and very quickly seeing whether your assumptions are correct or not.
Interesting. So at the end there, you're getting a bit toward methodology. Now, Alan mentioned that we kind of have failed to deliver the tools necessarily to code in a different way or at a different level of abstraction. But what about the advances in methodology, the shift from waterfall to Agile and Scrum? Professor Cusumano, have you seen changes in your work with software companies or in your observations on that front?
I have, although that question is not on our script, but no, I have a lot. I've done surveys on that. And I think Agile should, were commenting about this before, most of the Agile proponents are actually rather rigid people who look at Agile in a very inflexible, almost religious kind of way, which is very strange. But it's a topsy-turvy world we live in. But Agile, and even without using that term, I've been writing about, we called it the sink and stabilize approach, common in software development for personal computer companies, more of an iterative approach that has a lot of features of Agile, but doesn't have all the exact criteria that fits Agile, or Scrum. Scrum is a methodology that you can define very specifically with stand-up teams in the beginning, very short cycles or sprints, and incrementally building what you're doing, or maybe driven by prototypes. It is very common. A survey I did a few years ago, the majority of projects around the world were using some kind of an iterative or Agile development approach. Waterfall still persisted in some very big mission-critical kind of applications where people pretty much knew what they wanted to build and wanted to control and document very carefully what they were building. But the world is moving towards, or has been moving towards, a more flexible development approach. And the kind of activity we see now in all the app stores, for example, almost all those teams are quite fast and flexible and prototype-driven and use something that resembles Agile or iterative. So it is common, and I think it is very good for innovation because it lets you do a lot of experiments quickly, and trial and error hopefully leads to doing new things in better ways that add more value to customers, and really that's what we've defined innovation as being about.
Other views on this question of methodology? Seems to be one that does engender some religious debate among the technical community.
Just a funny add-on to Michael's point is that, if you look at whether it's, the companies like the Proctors of the world or the VC industry, they will tell you, or actually even, Clay Christensen over at Harvard, they'll tell you that of the successes, of things that ultimately became successful, somewhere between 80 and 95% started in the wrong direction. So the biggest mistake is people scale effort in the wrong direction. You scale things before you know whether those things are the right things or the wrong things. And so it's sort of a natural progression that what Michael was talking about. Before you scale that investment in both time and money, you do some experiments, you design experiments to test your assumptions, and you do it really fast. And from a CIO perspective, from this conference, that's the key, of course, from a technology platform. It's like, so how do you make sure you go from a standards, everything's locked down, things are controlled, and risk managed, to a world where teams can do what they need to do to validate quickly.
And what about the role of platforms? We've talked about a number of other aspects, but we've got, if we're talking about religious wars, we could discuss open versus proprietary. What does that mean? Is that even a relevant discussion anymore as the software industry starts to kind of reintegrate vertically in different ways? How would you think about that, Michael?
Okay. Michael, we're back to the script. So I've been thinking about that a lot. As I said, I've written several books that deal with this. And I break out the world into there's completely closed, and then there's closed but not closed, which is Apple, and then there's open but not open, which is really in Microsoft, and then there's maybe completely open, but maybe not completely open, which is, say, Google with Android, for example, and then maybe Linux is completely open. And it really is a spectrum. These are all software platforms on top of which people write applications and deliver different types of services. I've been for a number of years defining the term platform as a set of common components that solves a particular problem in a way that brings multiple parties together. The problem could be, how do you write applications for the iPhone, or how do you take the power of a computer and put it on a single chip? But that's really what platforms do, and companies historically have had in-house platforms that, again, this set of common components around which they build a family of related products. But when companies open up the features in those common components or the services they expose to outside companies, then you have the potential for, let's say, we've called it an ecosystem to bloom, and companies could start building applications on top of, the Pegasystems rules engine or something of that sort. And then again, potentially 1,000 flowers can bloom that otherwise would not have bloomed. So I think we see platforms as playing a tremendously important role in innovation across the world, and just allowing companies and users to benefit, but companies to innovate in ways that they could not possibly think of themselves or afford themselves. And again, we have some platforms that are not terribly good, but they become the standards, and they enable some cheaper, more powerful way of doing something, like DOS and Windows. And my explanation for that is that, of course, DOS and Windows was open enough to become a standard and adopted by hundreds of millions of people, whereas, say, the Mac was closed and never got beyond a niche in a market. So there are some disadvantages to being too open or too closed, but all the different positions on the spectrum have an impact on innovation.
Arthur, you spend a lot of time with CIOs. How do you see your customers starting to think about this question?
Yeah, just to follow up, Michael, and it's interesting. What we're seeing in the industry, and when I say the industry, we'll just call it technology, right? Software players, hardware players, network, cloud, services, you name it. There's been a really accelerated shift over the last probably 2 to 3 years due to the availability, more bandwidth, really a changing profile of consumption of data. And what we see is, even in our own business, less focus on the granularity of products, of tools, of standards, of open versus closed. Much more shift at a CIO, CFO, CEO level to investments in services that are effectively delivered behind the scenes. And a lot of discussion around cloud, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but clearly a dramatic shift now towards a services-oriented approach and an ecosystem now, a partner trading ecosystem for enterprises, for academia, for governments, that consists of people and information both within the walls of the enterprise and all the trading partners outside of the enterprise. So it's a whole different set of dynamics now that every CIO, every leader's got to face in looking at platforms.
Interesting. And so that creates some new dimensions or new vectors in that platform debate. Alan, I'd love to get your point of view on this, because Pega is a company that's grown up in in a world where some of today's platforms didn't exist, and now you're competing in a world with platforms of quite different styles and structures than maybe.
Well, I think the term platform can mean very different things. When you're talking on one hand, validly about Android being a platform, or DOS being a platform, or when in the context of the topic of this meeting, I think you're thinking of enterprises and how enterprise IT establishes platforms. And I think one of the mistakes that has happened is that historically people have thought of platforms as a way to build up apps that worked as a collection of silos in their organizations. and they would have a platform for this and a platform for that. What we found in some of the most innovative companies I know is they're thinking of the notion of a customer platform, sort of a conceptual platform that really causes them to organize the company differently. So just to give you an example of a conversation we had last week with a CIO of a very significant firm, what he said is he's realized that he's created the wrong platform, the wrong environment to create dynamic, multi-channel customer service. He's got a contact center platform. That's one set of technologies. He's got a interactive platform over the web. They're creating all sorts of SMS-based platforms. Their platform organization was in fact geared around technology stacks. And the revelation that he's come to is that the ultimate platform is what is the platform by which you define how you want to service your customers. Because this whole Generation C, always on, immediate gratification group of folks wants to start in the Facebook interface and end the transaction in the contact center or maybe through chat. And so the platform has to be a way that you can simultaneously deliver the exact same process across all your channels. It's not a series of platforms in the traditional sense when I started, where we were just worrying about building the loan system, and it was the customer's problem, the fact that that customer, in addition to a loan, also had a credit card. Well, we want them to integrate that in their brain. That's no longer satisfactory, particularly in this multi-channel world.
So, it seems like what you're saying is that the platform does not equal the stack.
No,
right?
Platform is a way of thinking, I think, about how you organize the problem, and it can encompass a variety of technologies that may be open source, may be proprietary, may be whatever, but it's about how you structure it. And the historical ways of structuring it are just not going to work in the current always-on connected world that we're in.
Yep. Well, interesting. Well, I'd like to kind of bring this back to the question of innovation. And so as we think about then this role of methodologies and platforms and creating the conditions for success, I also like to talk about the leadership role, right? And one thing we'd like to explore is what's the leadership role of the CIO in taking innovation into business processes and to customers. But I'd also like to think about a different kind of CIO, right? Because I think, Roy, you actually carry the title of innovation, right? Innovation officer. Should we have such beasts in your mind? Should they be in more organizations? And how would they be measured if we had them?
So, I am a big proponent of the of having someone whose job is to look out for innovation. And again, innovation broadly measured, not just new products and new services innovation. And the reason is that, as it's been written about really often, companies get really good at, they become successful by being good at something, and then it's very hard to change that which they do. So new ideas often get stuck. It's very hard to change directions and be nimble once you get good at being whatever it is you're good at that made you successful in the first place. And so innovation to me is everyone's role. It's something that every employee does all the time. But that's different than what does an innovation officer do. And an innovation officer is looking out for the things that a company has to do differently in order to succeed in building new revenue streams or even just allowing new ideas to see the light of day. So when I think about the innovation officer role, what I do think about is, what are those skills that you need that are different, and that's certainly part of it. How are you immersing your workforce in the reality of the world and the customer world in terms of so they can see the way work actually gets done? Are you creating fast response customer panels so they can vet new ideas quickly? Those are things that mature products don't really need, but new products across your portfolio and different divisions do tend to need. They generally have to change the dashboards that executives are using to manage the company. Most dashboards have some notion of, customer, not just shareholder metrics, revenue, and profitability. But as you move into this innovation space where it's new ideas that are fundamentally going to start immaterial, they're not large, whether they're new products or whether they're process improvements often, you need to look at things differently. You have to look at defining hypotheses and testing those hypotheses. So you're looking at small wins, and you're celebrating small wins. You're actually changing what you celebrate. You're not just pulling the $100 million big salesman up on stage, you're celebrating the guys who did rapid experiments to test ideas quickly. So there's things as culture changes that the innovation leaders have to drive as well. And then there's simply the reality of encouragement and coaching and sort of internal board of directors that needs to happen. You know, folks who are really great at new experimental businesses tend to be quite different than folks who are really great at working the matrix in large mature businesses. So they operate differently. They're comfortable modeling with uncertainty. You see them help teams get through some of those early days. Again, whether they're working on internal processes, rerouting call systems so the right call gets to the right rep and you're saving millions of dollars, like one of the things that happened in Intuit, or whether you're breaking out into entirely new sectors from a customer perspective.
You know, it's interesting just to throw in. I think back 2 months ago, I had dinner with the CEO of an Italian bank, one of the largest banks in Italy. And over dinner, he said, I've got an opening in the CIO role, but I also have thoughts about creating an innovation role on my leadership team. Keep in mind, I don't speak Italian, so it was an interesting conversation. But he asked, what do you think are the key attributes and characteristics? I'm trying to find these two people. And by the end of our conversation, I think we both convinced ourselves that the type of leaders going forward are going to have to be triple threats in the CIO role. Number one, they're going to have to know technology, and they're going to have to understand the future of technology, because that's where all corporations and enterprises have to skate to. Secondly, they're going to have innovation skills and experience in creating the culture and creating all the attributes that you've discussed. But third, they've got to understand the business. So hence the theory of triple threat. And in fact, he sent me a follow-up note and said, maybe I call this role CI2O. So innovation, Chief Innovation and Information Officer. And then he sent me a follow-up note and said, how do I get the business part in there? It got a little too long. So, but this is such a growing concern from every CEO that I see around the world, that from an HP perspective, we've actually built an entire global organization around strategic IT advisory services. And a lot of our practice work focuses right in this area. How do you bridge technology and innovation to fundamentally change a business for a very different world that we're all in right now?
I realized I didn't answer the second part of your question on how to measure. Is that?
Yeah, I'd be very interested to get your point of view, because that's always an interesting debate, right? Should there even be metrics for innovation?
So there's a couple of things that I think are important. First, again, since it's everyone's job, I do think it's really important to create sort of a horizons view in an organization where every leader is looking at both the revenue from their mature businesses and also revenue from things that are maybe not so old, a few years old. So that does make it more of a distributed task in terms of metrics. But when I think about the innovation leader, I see this sort of cascade, and having worked with a lot of enterprises and actually created some innovation roles at companies now in innovation programs, you tend to see participation and engagement type of metrics pretty quickly. You can focus on those types of things. But since it's not about ideas, you start to look at conversion metrics. How many ideas got implemented and went somewhere. And then you're looking at velocity, because it's like how you got to get the crank going. So how quickly can you test and vet these? And you start to measure how the speed aspect. And then within I'd say a year or two, you got to be looking at some of the shareholder metrics. So there's sort of an evolution of metrics when you're looking at your chief innovation officers. But I think there's also a critically important qualitative measure, which is if you ask your people, sort of the net promoter score, if you follow the net promoter methodology, likelihood to recommend whatever it happens to be. I think when you ask the likelihood to recommend your organization as a great place to innovate, or as a great place to experiment and innovate, what's the answer? And that's a metric, right? It's a qualitative metric, but would other people talk to their entrepreneurial friends and say, hey, you can be an internal entrepreneur here and do phenomenal things? It's actually a very good metric on sort of the culture you're creating.
So if I could jump in, I think sometimes in these discussions, there's a tendency to bring together two things that arguably could be brought together, but I think want to be teased apart. And one is the notion of invention, and the other is the notion of innovation. And I think invention is great. I think some of this experimentation can lead to moments of invention. But I think particularly in IT, it's possible to take steps that will bake innovation into your culture. So to give you an example, the company I mentioned before, Medco, which is a over $70 billion company, growing at 10 to 15% a year, which is hard. The president of Medco decided, working with the technology people, that was going to completely change the way that business and IT work together. He created a series of what he called BIACs. So you may be able to use some of this, so I do like the CI squared. He called it the Business Innovation and Agility Center. He took 800 people out of IT and co-located them with the business in Scrum teams. And by the way, I agree with you, Michael, that some of these religious fanatics can actually take all the good stuff about Scrum and sort of lock it up a little bit. But what he did is basically took the good parts about Scrum, and they focused on that, which is you've got business owners, business people in constant interaction with the people who are doing the implementation, work visible all the time, no obsession about what the big picture is going to be, but validated all along that you're going towards a general goal. And in terms of the results of innovation, from this exercise, he set a very specific goal. He said that over the next 3 years, they needed to reduce their run rate of labor expense by 30% in their business. So what that meant is on a $3 billion a year labor expense base, his measurement of innovation success was, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. Directionally, we understand you want to automate everything that can be automated that goes to the customer. You go innovate, you go figure that out. You use Scrum to achieve it, and give me $900 million a year at the end of this journey. That to my mind is an interesting story around management of innovation, at least as I've seen it.
It's a great example of how a CIO and a leadership team can then also just take a very particular leadership action that doesn't necessarily prescribe the answer, but it creates the conditions for success.
Can I jump in with another comment? I think, Roy, you said before that innovation is everybody's job all the time.
That everyone should be trying to, whatever they're working on, they should be doing it better. So you shouldn't just be executing the same thing every day.
Okay, so I'm not sure about that. I mean, that's not exactly what we teach.
Yeah.
And, well, because, there is invention, the occasional invention. There's innovation and continual improvement, which is important to do a lot of the time. Yeah. And I think what you mean is everyone should be engaged in that process of rethinking what they're doing and improving. But to do it all the time is maybe going too far. And the other point is we have invention, we have innovation, and then we have exploitation. I mean, somebody's got to make money. Somebody's got to run the processes, run the factories, and you don't want to be reinventing the Toyota Corolla every other week, right? You want to reinvent it periodically, and you want to innovate. So I think that's another thing that we can just push the idea of, or the importance of innovation a little bit too far.
So I agree with the intent of what you're saying, but
you're the chief innovation officer, so.
But what I'm trying to communicate, because execution is key. Like constantly coming up with new ideas that you never act on is most companies' definition of innovation. Unfortunately, I mean that's what you see very often. And so the execution, the moving them to action, is the critical part, and that execution and refinement of them. But again, when I'm defining innovation as that includes continuous improvement. It includes sustaining. One of the biggest breakthroughs for Intuit, and I don't know how closely everyone follows Intuit now. And if you look at us for the last 6 years since we've started these programs, we have grown, 3 times Google, 5 times the NASDAQ, 10 times the Dow, 20 times Microsoft. It's been a tremendous period of growth, and it is a belief that we can continue to extract extraordinary returns from core mature businesses, continuous improvement from those, as well as the new ideas.
But certain things you just sort of stabilize and execute on. Like you don't reinvent your TurboTax business every year, right?
But it's the engagement. Anytime someone sees something that is a better way, could be how to shave some time off, could be how to, drive some value.
Okay, to that point.
Go ahead.
Please. I was going to say TurboTax, you do get a new release every year.
Well, that's because there's minor changes, so it's incremental.
Innovations.
But the IRS has a role in that too.
But if you're going to talk TurboTax, I mean, look what those guys have done in creating a $1 billion franchise. So how many people know SnapTax? SnapTax was a combination of, Jay does. SnapTax is a combination of technology-driven innovation. So we had to create a group that looks at what's possible with new technology. That was one aspect of it. And said, there's a lot of new data entry mechanisms, voice, pictures, graphics, other things.
Sure.
So just take your W-2, take a picture of your W-2 and hit file and you're done with your taxes. So 20 million people can be done with their taxes in minutes. Right? And it's just take your iPhone out and using taking the numbers and putting them in the right boxes for you. Right? So that is anything but incremental. So they're focused on treating innovation as a portfolio.
But,
Right?
but I think the portfolio, it can be best understood, and you can actually have different people have different expectations of how they contribute to it if you tease it apart to the continuum of, you've got invention, you've got innovation, you've got continuous improvement, and you've got just, execute what you're doing with just optimal, lack of change.
Yeah, a line sticks in my head. It was about 20 years ago, I was looking at software development practices. This was at Bell Labs. Yep. And comparing them with other companies, particularly Japanese software factories, and I was involved in setting up a software factory in India at that time too. And the guy at Bell Labs said to me, my biggest problem is I have too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
that was not the problem in the software factory world at that time. So you can't have everybody innovating all the time. Some people have to be executing.
Yeah.
And periodically improving what they're doing and build that mentality in.
But I like the way you talked about engagement because, when you talk, again, if I look at Intuit, in our call centers, the guys on the phones in the call centers have to be answering calls and just conducting business.
Right.
But the big difference is, especially, with Brainstorm as an example of a platform, whenever those guys have a conversation where they have a new insight, they are immediately engaged in the innovation process, and that information is getting back to the decision-making teams.
Yeah. So actually, platform is a good case. If there's too much churn in the platform, it makes it hard for people to innovate around it. So you want some stability. Certainly, if changes are made that break things in the past, APIs that become that are not compatible going forward and backwards, it creates a real problem. So stability in a platform, actually, in many ways, you can argue leads to more innovation. But the platform itself the platforms have to evolve, whether it's a customer service platform or a more technology platform. But what's the rate that they need to evolve? Is another question. So
other platforms designed for evolution is the key. One of the interesting questions is why can't the person who in some cases comes up with the innovation then also be responsible for operationalizing it? Mm-hmm. The whole notion. Once again, this is more true, I would say, in the software. In an IT field in corporations than, say, coming up with a new version of Bleach. Yeah. But, the ability in technology to actually have people use software to themselves get a different result, is one of those things that you lose in the sort of software factory mechanism where you're throwing stuff over the wall and something's coming back that you hope is right, which frankly is why the Japanese software factories, I don't know how you'd rate them, but I don't think they turned into the juggernaut that everyone was afraid of.
No, the Indians did a better job with them. They're more flexible in methods and technology platforms.
Gentlemen, let me call a bit of a halt there so that we can open things up to the audience, because we have about 10 minutes or so here to go, and hopefully a few questions have germinated in the minds of the group. So please step forward. Just quickly state your name, ask one question, and then we'll take answers from the panel. Let's start over here.
I'm Ravi Warren, CIO of Air Liquide. I listened with real interest to the whole discussion on innovation, but part of it that I would like to get some clarity from you on is it's not just a question of incubating tons of little ideas. The one piece that was missing to me that we didn't get to discuss was creating coherence, a governance around this, a conductor, because you could, in some other sense, be creating systemic dysfunction otherwise. Could you address that?
Well, I think, Alan, you started to address that in your comment before.
What you need, when we talk about a platform, the idea of a platform for innovation, something that both allows business people and IT people to work together, the IT people trying to make sure there's coherence, the business people being hands-on in the actual creation process, to my mind, is where IT technology needs to go. We need to make it so that the business people can articulate their models that describe how their business works, in a new set of languages that are not COBOL, Fortran, or Java.net, but in fact are the metaphors they would use to describe their business to another person, and then have that computer IT infrastructure be able to directly capture that and automate the programming. That sort of model allows IT to work differently, and the governance, a lot of the governance, can actually be built into the platform itself if you get the metaphors right, I would say.
Yes, I'd say that the most effective companies I've seen is a combination of organic bottoms up and sort of the governance tops down. You have to have a lot of the insights emerging and going forward, and you have to give them time to germinate, essentially. The initial governance, to me, is actually extremely clearly defined measurable outcomes. What is it that you're trying to improve? If you're working on tax, it may be how many hours it takes to prepare your taxes or the size of the refund you get. And so I'm looking for things that increase the size of your refund or decrease the number of hours that it takes to do your taxes. If it's in the small business world with QuickBooks, then maybe I'm looking for things that make small businesses more profitable. And so there's your initial governance without too much governance, frankly. And what you see is that the real governance comes into play when you're talking about resource allocation. So ideal is crafting and creating an environment where all those people can drive 1,000 ideas forward in small, tiny bits of time, gathering evidence, until you're making the bets on where do you want to put your resource bets. And that's a very different thing. The way that we do that is very much what's your hypothesis, how can you design an experiment where a couple people for a couple weeks or a couple months, whether it's through sketching and storyboarding, whether it's a process innovation you're going to do in one lobby of one hospital, you're going to try something and you're going to get me evidence. Because I know as an executive, I was one of the guys who built the Quicken business, helped build it in the early 90s and our web businesses in the late 90s. And playing that role of executive who pretends they know the difference between the good ideas and the bad ideas, it's not true. Like, you can't know a priori the difference between the great ideas and the less good ideas. You need to get more evidence and more information behind them so you can make those bets. So you do the combination of organic and tough.
I think there have been different models for how standards evolve and how platforms evolve. In some cases, it is a company's product technology, or one or two companies like Intel and Microsoft or Apple or Google that become de facto standards and platforms, and then people build around them. And then the community of complementers of that platform sort of help migrate it forward. In other cases, the government has had to step in and define platform standards, say for high-definition television, or in the case with the internet, the World Wide Web Consortium. Again, when a platform has broad-reaching consequences and how it's governed, I think you have had different mechanisms appear. I've been looking at one in the healthcare industry where probably the government is going to have to step in to define a platform for handling digital records, or in digital homes, for example, where there's 24 different companies fighting to be the Microsoft or the Intel of the future digital home, and somebody's going to have to step in and arbitrate. It could be an industry association. So there are different governance models, and people have thought about them, and it does depend on the context of the platform.
And we're talking at very different levels.
Yeah,
right?
these are different levels.
In the electronic medical records,
But I thought his question was on the. I'm not quite sure, but
the lack of governance. I mean, we have actually one of the leading electronic medical records platforms now. The way that happened is the lack of governance.
Right, but a platform there's in-house company platforms that you use and control, and then there's industry-wide platforms that multiple companies have adopted, or governments, et cetera. And it's getting the broader adoption that is a problem, and governing that is also a problem because one company doesn't control it. Yeah. And sometimes you have revolutions against one firm that attempts to be dominant. Yeah. So you have Symbian, you have Consortium, Linux Consortium, the anti-EMC Consortium, and data storage, for example.
Yeah.
Well, let's cut over here and take a question from the right side.
Dave Kingston, just wanted to stay on the governance point, but within an organization. I haven't heard a lot about predictive markets for a while, and ways that people might use collaborative platforms and try to get the broader set of folks involved in knowing what is a good idea. Do you have examples of folks who are doing that, organizations you've seen do it well, and what was really key to making that come alive?
Okay. So I'm a fan of predictive markets, but with a major caveat. I believe in them mostly, as most of the white papers you'll read on predictive markets talk about, when the people doing the predicting are the ones who are closest to the issue. So if you're doing predictive markets on development teams, The collective wisdom of that development team in terms of what's the real release date going to be is going to be a heck of a lot closer than the single program manager who's supposed to know the answer. I don't believe in predictive markets so much in terms of what are the best ideas in the organization. There have been, I think, some clear exceptions to that rule. One fairly well-known one was Best Buy. The difference there is that the Best Buy employee base is an incredible proxy for their lead user. And so therefore, their ability to be predictive of what might work in a consumer market in terms of a customer-facing innovation is much higher than your typical organization. Even a consumer products organization wouldn't be that good as a Best Buy example. So I think predictive markets have their place, but not in terms of ferreting out which of these ideas should I really pay attention to.
Okay, how about over here?
Thank you. My name is Mike Karp. I'm an industry analyst with the firm of Patak Noel. And I guess, Alan, in deference to your earlier comment, I should tell you I'm a recovering PL1 programmer. But I have been PL1 free for 25 years.
I didn't think there were any left.
The concept of platform is interesting at a whole number of levels. I'd like to expand it just a little bit, though, and ask you about your feelings about platform within the context of the concepts of best in breed and best in class, which very often seem to be useful so long as you are looking at a very limited subset of IT technology. But when you look across the IT floor and you have multiple best in classes, even within the same platform, however you're defining that, very often they are mutually in a state of mutual disgust with one another, and never mind interoperability, aren't even available, aren't even able to pass information back and forth. So if you'd comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Who are you looking at?
Well, I'll just jump in on the back of the PL1 comment. I've recovered about 20 years ago myself, I'm pleased to say. But I think the distinction of when you should just sort of use what's there in the stack versus do something that's best in breed is this something that's going to help differentiate you? For the things that you need to differentiate you as an organization, I think you've got to be prepared to do something that's special. And one of the most pathetic things I've seen in the software business is where some of the large sort of traditional ERP vendors actually tell clients that they should change their businesses to match what the software does. I can tell no one has actually ever heard that said, right? You should match your business. How stupid is, reality, how stupid is that if it's something that's actually going to matter to the competitiveness of your business? And by the way, I think that's the antithesis of software being soft and innovation by any measure. So,
True, but SAP has built an $11 billion business around that, right? So it sort of has worked. For them at least, right? But
was that advocacy? Is that your recommendation to your students now?
But actually, the reaction to SAP has created enormous innovation in software as a service and cloud computing world, which are much cheaper ways of doing the same kind of thing, not necessarily as rich and in easier ways. But the issue of best of breed versus platforms and stacks is sort of an old one in IT, and I don't know what the answer is to it. I think it is a question of you've got to make some decisions about what's really useful for your organization. But I think that kind of integration is getting a bit easier, and since Oracle is buying up everyone that used to be best of breed, it may take 10 years, but they're going to integrate everything at some point.
And what's that going to do to integration?
So then we'll have the world will be split into 2 or 3 camps. But I think it's still an ongoing problem. But I do think moving things to the cloud or SaaS or different web service architectures makes some of that problem easier to deal with, at least integration, at least a little bit easier.
Let's go over here. I think this probably should be our last question, given timing, unfortunately.
Well, thank you then. My name is Linda Pellicudas. I'm the Principal Managing Partner of Strategy and Design Solutions. And my question is on a little bit different slant on this. I'd like to ask you a question about organizational change and the measures that you have taken and found successful in bringing innovation from every member of the organization or from your clients. Are there strategies that you have found successful or strategies that you have tried and found unsuccessful?
So, it's interesting. World's largest technology company, over 300,000 employees. And we've acquired probably 40 or 50 companies in the last 10 years. And my guess is, we'll continue to have organic and inorganic growth. So it's a constant challenge for us. And we start, our motto inside of HP is, let's take care of ourselves so we have credibility before we go discuss different options, methods, organizational structures, technology, et cetera, with our clients. It's an interesting journey, and that's the first thing. It's a transformational journey to get to a state where you can be truly innovative and have the organization and governance in place. And I think one gentleman mentioned the word coherence. And it's interesting, coherence around innovation is a very tough thing these days. There are a number of trends, if you look at it, and I see this across multiple industries across the globe. You have the real-time need for information instantaneously, anywhere, anytime. You now have a proliferation of hundreds of millions of different types of devices and sensors that trade information back and forth. You have trading partners that have changed. The environment now is a big concern, not just legally, but financially to enterprises. And I'll tell you, the most fundamental changing aspect to corporations right now is the consideration around workforce. So my guess is we probably don't have any 18 and under folks in the room. But if you think about over the next 10 years, the folks entering all of our workforces are going to have grown up from the age of 2 months old or 12 months old with a device in their hands or a keyboard in their hands. How do you adapt them into your organization? How do you create a work environment that they want to be there, number one? Number two, how do you let them thrive and innovate for whatever your business is, whether it's products or services? Those are some very big factors. Now, from an HP perspective, we have a very distinct point of view around what we call an instant-on enterprise. And that is a combination of people first, culture, technology, finances, business processes that allow organizations to be adaptive, flexible, very secure, and ultimately, as an enterprise, you've got to create a context-rich experience for your people. If you don't have that, you can't innovate. Now, I love your idea, which is get think tanks together, get 800 people in a room, different disciplines and backgrounds.
Not one room, but yeah.
Right? And I'll tell you, a lot of companies try that, but here's the reality. People are spread across the world now. Try to innovate on a conference call or over a cell phone. Try to track data in real time. It's a very tough challenge. But there are ways to do this. And again, it is a transformational journey that I guarantee every corporation, every enterprise, every institution will go through over the next 5 years.
Well, I was just going to say, pragmatically, what I've seen work and not work are when you actually break down the walls and get the business people and the IT people actually together, not always physically, it can be virtually as well, but together on a mission. When you go and tell the CFO you're going to invest a month's worth of their time and effort without knowing exactly what the whole project's going to cost, and you let people do it one step at a time, where the investment of the month is actually much less than it would have been putting together the huge PowerPoints to get approval for the whole thing anyway. When you can break that methodology by the combination of cooperation and reducing the waterfall mentality, you can start to stimulate both innovation and continuous improvement in people where you otherwise wouldn't get it because it's structurally impaired.
And I'll simply say that the question goes right to the heart of change management, right? Because innovation management, so much of it is change management. And sort of the essence of change management is you need your burning platform, right? You need your sense of urgency that you have to change for some brutally difficult reason. We had most of our growth coming from old stuff and didn't have the pipeline we wanted, and we weren't participating in new things like mobile apps, et cetera. So we kind of had this really good burning platform. And on top of your burning platform, you do change what you measure. You change what you make visible in terms of what are the dashboards you're putting up on the wall, what are you celebrating, what are you making, what are you recognizing in the organization. And then I add to it sort of my version of exactly what you said, Alan, which is, if CIOs could have their people shadow new teams trying to do new things and drive new things through organizations, you'd be amazed what you saw, the specific places that people get stuck. Everything from standing up a new stack in the data center to getting those customers to learn from quickly, because you don't have those kind of platforms and learning mechanisms, to, boy, I want to set up a new SKU in the billing system, and it's brutally difficult because it's so rigid, because it's been managed for, standardization. You start to see that, okay, I need to start to break down obstacles, because that's what I call that last one, is I need to change the way work gets done internally. But it's all based on what are you paying attention to on the dashboard level, and is it speed? Is it revenues coming from new ideas being generated? Are you celebrating people who haven't delivered anything material yet, but who have done some great innovative work putting things out into the world or designing experiments fast? It changes your culture, and that's what change management is.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your insights today. I'd like to thank the audience for your attention and your questions. And any further words to close?
I mean, as you can see, this is a very passionate subject for all of you, and we are a little bit over our time for this particular panel, but thank you, moderator, and the panel for a very lively discussion on a very interesting topic.